Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and improve business processes so companies can scale and thrive. Now, people ask me, what software do I like that I use in order to document processes and procedures? And I'd like to share with you a software that I really like, which is Sweet Process. Now, Sweet Process is an amazing process documentation software that helps create clear, step-by-step instructions for every task in your company. Anywhere from onboarding new clients to training employees to responding to client requests. With Sweet Process, you have a central place for the team to access procedures and instructions anytime and from any device. So, as a loyal listener to this podcast, or even if you just joined us for the first time, you can try this software for free with a 28-day free of charge trial. All you need to do is go to sweetprocess.com/Adi, that's ADI, like my name, and you can sign up for your free trial and start using it today. And today's guest is Louis Schiff. Hello, Louis.
Hi there, Adi.
Hey, very happy to have you on the podcast. And Louis, you are the perfect guest to talk about systems and processes and scaling businesses, because you are an accomplished entrepreneur. You had and you founded and sold 2 businesses. You are the chairman of the board for the very prestigious fellowship, Birthing of Giants, that is being hosted by MIT and Oxford twice a year. And you know many entrepreneurs, help them in order to achieve their goals and their dreams. And I'm going to let you, first of all, explain to us what is the Birthing of Giants, and also tell us about your other program that you have. It's pretty fascinating, but I think you'll be able to explain it better.
Sure. Well, I'll keep it brief. Birthing of Giants Fellowship Program is for the owners of businesses with revenues between $5 million and $250 million. And what that means is these are owners. These are not typically venture capital, sort of Silicon Valley type contraptions. These are real companies owned by a person, maybe 2 or 3 partners, but that they're in a great spot. They're growing quickly. Companies in our space are typically growing easily 25%, sometimes 1,000% a year. And whatever they're doing is the right thing at the right time. They're in the right sectors. They're in sectors that are growing rapidly. So what they do with Birthing of Giants is they come through. We have a 5-day program, and we essentially teach them about infrastructure. We teach them how to build, to make sure that their company is properly built in a way that they won't stumble. So some of it's negative. I mean, you'll hear about one company could have so much business with one client that they're quite vulnerable. You hear about all sorts of things that go wrong in growing companies. And so the idea of Birthing of Giants is to help them create a solid infrastructure so when things go wrong, they can still thrive. But the outcome is the same. They want to build companies. Sometimes they want to sell them. Sometimes they want to hold them forever. But they want to build really big companies. That's Birthing of Giants Fellowship Program. We started another program a couple of years ago called Moonshots and Moneymakers, which is hosted at Oxford. And Moonshots and Moneymakers is a place where people who run these kinds of companies I just described, which we call moneymakers, they're really well-run companies. They make money. And they want to know how to transform their businesses into moonshots, which is to say, they might run a business that has 50 million in revenue. They're doing well. Maybe they're making $5 million a year. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But they're seeing other people build companies that are being sold for $1 billion. So Moonshots and Moneymakers is for people who want to be, whether you're the owner or it's or you're a member of the C-suite, but you want to learn how you can turn your company from a moneymaker into a moonshot. And we've been working at Oxford University on this project for quite a while. So, of course, that's a fun topic.
Oh, it sounds very fun. Absolutely. Great programs. And first, before we start talking about productivity and systems, I want to give a big shout out to John Corcoran from Rise 25, because he's the one who introduced us.
Yes,
and I listened to your podcast with him, and I love that interview. So definitely people should check it out. And I wanted to interview you as well, because it's just exactly what I like to talk about is productivity, processes, procedures, systems. So, Louis, tell me for yourself, why is it so important that a business has systems in place?
So I'm going to put it in Birthing of Giants terms, but it really is very consistent with your language. So a lot of successful entrepreneurship in America is by somebody that we call technically brilliant. So they're good at something. I mean, I can give you examples of people who are good at writing software code, and they're also good at farming, but they're good at something.
Right.
And they're technically brilliant. Then the people that we admire in this country and in the world as entrepreneurs are people who take their technical brilliance and they wrap a business around it. And so we then call that business brilliant. So you go from being technically brilliant to business brilliant. As you know, most people never go from being technically brilliant to business brilliant. They're good at something and they do it for the rest of their careers. Our little subset are the people who are business brilliant. So they've wrapped a business, and they come to Birthing of Giants when they want to become what we call leadership brilliant. How do you go from being business brilliant to leadership brilliant? Well, that whole transition from business brilliant to leadership brilliant is really saying, okay, I've been smart. I've been working hard. I've wrapped a business around my skill. I've hired 10 or 50 people to help me do it. Now we have to scale up. I mean, you could even work backwards. There's no way someone's going to buy a company for 10 or $100 million if the owner is so important to that company that if they take a vacation, the whole thing falls apart.
Absolutely.
Right. So our world is, how do you go from business brilliant to leadership brilliant? And a lot of that is, how do you get the right people in place, and how do you put the right systems and processes in place so that the company runs itself? And in fact, for most of our business owners, the process of going from business brilliant to leadership brilliant really makes their lives a whole lot easier, makes their companies a lot easier. One of the perils of entrepreneurship is burnout. And so when you're laying in all this infrastructure and all these systems and processes, you're also really doing a great job of avoiding burnout. You know, I can tell you all day stories of companies that had to sell for a fraction of what they were worth because maybe the business owner got sick and they were so integral to how the company ran that if they had to spend a month in the hospital, the whole thing falls apart. So that's, you know, it's all about building strong companies.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and I have stories like that as well. I mean, I'm working with a client that, you know, he had a big business and he got sick and his wife had to step in and she had to figure it all out and wasn't able to. And, you know, but then she started putting in the systems in place. So she had to start figuring it out. But had he had all those systems in place already, and by systems, we mean like, you know, management systems, right? We have processes documented. We know everybody knows what they're doing. They are cross-trained. We talked about cross-training before we start this podcast. Then she wouldn't have had that problem, right? So that's the bad side of it. And then we have the success stories that we all know about, that we all want to hear about because it inspires us in terms of business owners that were able to replace themselves, right?
Yeah, and this is really the more aspirational way to describe all of this is, wouldn't it be great if you spent all day doing the things you like to do and not this other stuff you have to do to make your companies run? So every business owner in my community, as I'm sure all the business owners you know, remember fondly back in the day when they were everything. They took out the garbage and they wrote the letters and they made all the phone calls. And they talk about it as they should, nostalgically and with pride. But they have to move past that. They have to go from business brilliant to leadership brilliant, which means the good news is they get to do more of what they're good at and they should be doing a lot less of everything else. And that feels great.
It does, absolutely. You know, and from my experience, you have to have an eye on a mountain and a certain goal, right? Because you can be a business owner and some business owners love that business. I mean, they say that they want to be leadership brilliant, right? Mm-hmm. But they actually enjoy the fact that they are the center of everything, right? That everything is around them and they, I don't know if they enjoy, but for some, it gives them
it's their identity. It's their identity.
Exactly. It gives them the sense of security, right? Because I am, and I experienced that before as well. I mean, had two businesses as well. And it's kind of like, if you're not doing it, then what am I going to do all day? Somebody else is going to run my business. I am not going to be needed. So I think it's also, it's finding the next game, right? I mean, how do you work with businesses to figure out what the next game is, or figure out why do you want to actually go into leadership brilliance?
Well, we're a community, so they can look to the person to the left and to the right of them, and they can see how they're handling this. We do kind of define the paths, and one path we call human scale, which is to kind of run a company that's you can always get your arms around. You can always talk to the 10 or 20 people who you work with, and you can shout over to the next cubicle. You can do it like that, and hopefully those companies are very profitable. Because they're very low in infrastructure. Obviously, there's a little danger there because if you get sick, something bad happens. But if you want to be human scale, and then how to get very, very profitable. The other ways are to become a very big company. We call it go big or go home, or we call it being a smart company, which is more like being a moonshot. A company that's so valuable they can barely even figure out how valuable it is. And yeah, there are folks who just want to be human scale. They just want to be that. So then we would just say, okay, well, here's best practices of human scale companies. But there are plenty of people who say, look, I want to work here for the rest of my life. I make $1 million a year. I'm very happy. I'm my own boss. I'm in control of my environment. So I wouldn't argue with somebody who wants that path. That's a perfectly good path. I would just say, okay, but just make it so that your company isn't so vulnerable to the threats that are pointing at it.
Absolutely. So you have a great story about the moonshot, right? In terms of an example. Go ahead.
I have hundreds of stories.
I know you do, but there was one that you were gonna just like that one.
Well, actually, I have a really fun one that I just came across. A lovely woman named Ariane Daugan. She runs a meat wholesaling business called D'Artagnan Foods. So she's a butcher, effectively, although a very large butcher. Her meat wholesaling business does hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And they essentially sell very, very high quality organic meat to the best restaurants in America. And that was a good business. That is a moneymaker. By that, I mean, it's a very solid, predictable revenue flow business. She's worked very hard to build it over 30 years. But it became clear to her that her customers only wanted certain parts of the cow. And there's a lot of parts left over. And they just didn't want that. Her customers were restaurateurs. They want what they want. So she started to go down this path of how do I use the rest of the cow? It took her into building an e-commerce business, meaning, she started to make small 1 or 2 pound portions available to individuals like you or me who would order it. And there's a ton of complexity and technology involved in storing and freezing and shipping and processing orders. So different than her wholesaling business, which is, they bring 100 pounds of meat. They have a lot of communication with their customers. They have an account management team, all that stuff. She had to build this whole e-commerce front end. So the theme of that story is what happened when the butcher hired a chief technology officer? And the answer is an e-commerce business that, even though it's much smaller at this moment than her wholesaling business, an outside person, an investment banker or whatever, a private equity person, would look at that and say, that e-commerce business, much smaller than the wholesaling business, is actually worth more than the wholesaling business because the growth potential of that business is huge. And the ability to have relationships with their customers, the profit margins on that meat that they sell for 1 pound is much better. So she was a moneymaker who turned into a moonshot because she had to solve this problem, which is what do I do with the rest of the cow? A lot of moneymakers have this huge opportunity because they know their business so well. And if they come up with a new way to deliver their product or service that has much better gross margins, as that business does, and a much bigger audience, as that business does, they quickly find themselves in moonshot territory. And that's what it is.
Absolutely. So does that apply to every industry? Like, can you take like a contractor or a dentist and turn them from moneymakers to moonshot?
So what happens is, anytime you're at a cocktail party, when we used to go to cocktail parties, everyone talks about tech. The truth of the matter is tech is a means to an end. So if you took that contractor or that dentist and you said, how does tech play a role in your business that does those two things I just mentioned, increase gross margins and expand your audience? So maybe you're not the dentist anymore that sees patients. Maybe now you're the developer of a technology that helps dentists manage some aspect of their business. But the old version would be, I'm a Silicon Valley guy. I have an idea. I'm going to raise $1 million. I'm going to try and build it. It's going to take me 2 years to see if anybody wants to buy it. By the way, at the end of that process, I own 3% of my business because I had to raise money so many times. Versus that dentist you just described, who knows their business so well, has a reputation in their business, can bring that product to their customers and see if they're interested in it, fund it themselves, maybe in the early stage when they're trying to figure out if it really works. And they'll own a lot more of that business. It'll be a lot more valuable, and it'll just be a bigger opportunity. I wrote about a janitor who did this and who's doing it right now. So you can do it at any business. You just have to think about how technology, plays a role in your business that raises gross margins and increases your addressable audience.
Absolutely. So Luis, I didn't mention at the beginning, but you're an author of 5 books.
Well, I've been writing about, I built 2 businesses that I sold to publicly traded companies, but I've been writing about mostly it's about the American journey. It's about how people from the middle class, regular people, just like you and me, same school, same everything. How is it that some of them, a small percentage of them, end up being massive wealth creators? And I've been writing about that for 20 years now. And the Moonshots and Moneymakers is just an extension of that idea, grow up middle class, just like everyone else, but somehow about 1 out of 10 of us have a completely different experience. Why?
Tell us, I'm definitely going to read those books, and I encourage our listeners to look it up. I'm sure it's on Amazon, Luis Schiff, and you'll see the 5 books there. But I need a little bit of a of a preview on that. So what is the common denominator that you see with people that actually make, like entrepreneurs? They didn't raise money. They didn't, the success stories that we all want to hear and be like. What is the common denominator that you discovered?
So there's corollaries to what you do, Adi. So I can make them, I think, on the fly. The first is, I already mentioned it. It's do more of what you're good at. The reverse of that, which is so important and always overlooked, is do less of what you're bad at. Do more of what you're good at, do less of what you're bad at. So I wrote a book about that one thing. But, when you spend, and a normal person in business probably spends 10% of their time doing what they're really good at, and the rest of their time is stuff they have to do. If you can go from 10% to 20%, it's a huge difference. But first you have to figure out what you're good at. And then you have to get into this mode of what your company does very well is, how do I hand off this other stuff to other people? And how do we document it and systematize it so that I can do more of what I'm good at? But that if you speak to incredibly successful people, the most successful people we all admire, they will tell you they spend 20, 30, 40% of their time doing what they're really good at. And that's a game changer. The second for a lot of people is you have to go up the ladder of money, in a sense of earning money at what you're good at. So let's say you're a house painter. You start out as a house painter, then you have to, earn money by going from working for a house painter to becoming your own house painter. And then if you kind of follow the whole version of this to Moonshots and Moneymakers, eventually you're going to incorporate technology that allows you to really scale and build a high gross margin business around house painting. But you have to earn money at the thing you're doing at the highest level of optimization possible. Then you have to build it's complicated, but it's not. You have to find half a dozen people around you that are going to help you do this, right? You cannot do it alone. Every successful business owner has a small group of people who help them do what they want to do. So if you know what you're good at, if you're constantly optimizing how you make money doing what you're good at, if you're surrounding yourself with a handful of people who help you do what you're good at, that's success. That's it.
That is such a recipe for success. You make it sound so easy, but I am totally with you. I've seen it over and over again. In terms of, do more of what you're good at. So let's say as a business owner, if you're the rainmaker, right? If you're the one who is great at bringing deals, at selling, you see it so often that, you find a business owner trying like a contractor, okay? So then they're trying to do their own bookkeeping. Why don't you just pay somebody, even if you have to pay them top dollar to do their bookkeeping, do that, but then go and bring more deals. How many deals you can actually bring in that amount of time that is worth maybe $70 an hour. It's totally exaggerating, right? But you can bring a deal for $100,000, but you still feel like you have to do it because nobody else can do it. So do more of what you're good at, but that goes together in terms of the delegation. Do less of what you're bad at. So hire, surround yourself with people. That's why people surround themselves with, like the fellowship, right? People like you that have been there, done that, they can guide them. And that is what success is all about. So I think from what I hear, what you're saying is really a state of mind, right? Is deciding that you can do it and be willing to explore the ways of how successful entrepreneurs have done that.
Yeah, I teach a class to undergraduate students, so these are 20-year-old young people, and they're just paralyzed by fear and the fear of failure. And so that's what drives almost every decision they make. And, I get it one semester with them. I'm not sure how much progress I make, but an entrepreneur is not worried about failure. They fail all the time. I love this great story. I had one gentleman come in onto this class and talk about his 10 projects for the next 6 months. And he just goes through them all, and there's all these different projects. And at the end of it, I said, how many do you think of these 10 will succeed? He says, probably none of them. Now, for a young person to hear that, or a lot of people who just love security, that's a terrifying prospect. For an entrepreneur, that's just Tuesday. Failure is just baked into it. And failure is no big deal because, and here's the big win, Adi, you learn what you're really good at by failing at everything that you're bad at. And if you open yourself up to failure, and I use the word failure, which is a word that everyone's just like their brain goes on fire when they hear failure. And I just try to use it over and over again so it has no meaning. If you fail a lot, you figure out what you're best at. It's the last thing left. And so it's very hard to figure out what you're bad at. And it's very hard to figure out what you're good at if you don't figure out what you're bad at. And you never figure out what you're bad at without failing.
Absolutely. And would you say that would be, you mentioned the word security, and that can definitely paralyze people from moving forward because they're looking for that security, right? So what would you say is the security for an entrepreneur? Would that be figuring out what they're good at?
Well, there's a little bit of, there's a period in the beginning where it is kind of terrifying, of course. But here's what I say to folks, these young undergraduates, but a lot of people who have, what we'll call regular jobs. Thank God we don't have regular jobs. Is if you have one employer, actually, that's a huge amount of risk. That's like being a company with one customer. And that doesn't make any sense. Whenever a company comes into Birthing of Giants and they say, oh, I get 80% of my business from one customer, we say, you don't have a company, you have a job. You just have one person or one company that can do your business. So right away, a business that has 10 or 100 or 1,000 clients or customers, they have spread their risk already right away. So I would say the person who says, oh, I work for this big company, so I have job security. I'd say you don't have job security. You have one customer. It's a really bad idea. That one customer doesn't want to work with you anymore. You have zero business. So an entrepreneur who has 100 customers loses 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 is still in business. I would just flip it. I would say that entrepreneurs have a ton of security.
I love it. That analogy just did it. I love it. That's very true. It's like you're diversifying the risk here. So that's for sure. Cool. So tell me, Louis, let's talk about systems. What are the most successful, or what are the key components of a system or productivity tools that a business should have for them to be able to scale up?
Well, this will sound funny, but it's probably not so true anymore. But even up until a few years ago, a lot of businesses were run on spreadsheets. Pretty amazing, and a spreadsheet is a really good place to go if you're just trying to figure stuff out, but it's not a good place to go if it scales up. You can't manage complexity on a spreadsheet. You can't manage 5 or 10 or 50 people on a spreadsheet. So I think we're just seeing a lot of people, if you go back a long time ago, starting a business was really complicated and you spent a lot of time on silly stuff. You couldn't get a bank account in the old days without knowing somebody. You'd have to have like a friend vouch for you that already had an account at that bank. To get a credit card account, where you could accept credit cards, oh my God, super complicated.
Right.
Now, someone watching this video could probably have those things set up before the end of this podcast, right? They can be incorporated. They can have a bank account, credit card, you name it. So, I mean, it's you've heard this a million times, but the world we live in now, the cloud-based systems that you pay by the month, you don't even have to sign long-term contracts anymore. Oh my gosh, this has changed everything. So these systems are hugely powerful. The flip side of it is that there are so many of them. They've proliferated so much. It's hard to know which ones to use. I have a good story of a company that people have heard of called Edible Arrangements, which is the person who founded that business, Tariq Farid, loves technology. And so he built a business that relied on technology. Even 20 years ago, he would send videos down to his franchisees to train them on how to do this and do that. And as a result, the headcount of the corporate headquarters of Edible Arrangements is way less than a typical franchise system. He just has fewer people working in it because he has always relied on technology. But the second piece of that that's so important is not only was he a techie guy who loved tech, he only attracted franchisees who loved tech. And as a result, they all bought into tech. And now that company runs much more efficiently, much more profitably than a lot of other companies of its similar size. So the tech is there, but you need to have a kind of there are companies who adopt and like tech, and there are companies who don't.
Right.
First
and I love to tell my story. My background is industrial engineering. And when I, as an industrial engineer, my first job, I was supposed to, basically what I was tasked with is figure out the processes so then we can have the software engineer come afterwards and actually code it and create a software, right? So you can do it the other way around. You can't just use tech without having an organization, because then it becomes a mess. And I say it with my clients. We have this expensive CRM. We use 1% of it probably, but we just dump names in there, but it's not really workable. So that's where my thought on it, and I wanted to hear I would love to hear your opinion on it as well. You have to design it. Like, you use tech smartly, but like anything else, you have to design it. It's kind of like, when you're building a house with no blueprint, no matter what, the best pipes and the best appliances, but if you stick your refrigerator in the middle of the living room, it's not going to work, even though it's going to be very expensive.
I think this is the era that we're at now. It's user interface, user experience. So the CRM from 5 years ago already looks really dated compared to something that's coming out now. But we have a long way to go. I think to make I'm sure you do the same thing. I have people who work for my company that maybe they're sort of down at the bottom of our pyramid in terms of the hierarchy, and so they just use the tech to get the job done. They don't really care anything more than that. And the problem is that there is so much more that tech can do. So if you're just trying to get the job done, you just kind of bang through it in your own way. It doesn't work well. We need people. I think the skill of the future is to be able to leverage these systems the most. I'd love to see kids graduating from school already knowing how to use these systems and knowing the language around them. Because you're absolutely right. We have great technology and we use so little of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, in closing, I would like to talk about something that we talked before the interview, and really it was very inspirational in terms of, you were talking about how the businesses that you work with are actually affecting their own community, like building the strength of the economic community, the economics in the community, and relying on small businesses, because that's what really makes the community here really thrive, is those small businesses. And we have to definitely empower those businesses. So I'd like to hear more about that in terms of your vision, in terms of your view of how, by what you're doing and helping build those businesses, how we're actually impacting the overall system.
Yeah, well, it's even bigger than that. So the mission of Birthing of Giants is to help foster entrepreneurial capitalism. So entrepreneurial capitalism is the kind of capitalism I'm talking about. I'm not talking about Fortune 500 capitalism or crony capitalism or all the other. There's some bad capitalism. Entrepreneur capitalism is a certain kind. And entrepreneurial capitalism, we know that entrepreneurs spread their work quite wide. They source overseas and they work inside smaller communities in America. We know that and I mean this in the best way, they're not the most sophisticated around tax planning. So guess what? They just basically pay their taxes. they're not like hiding it in 16 places. So they hire people. A lot of the companies in the entrepreneurial capitalism category use human labor to solve problems. That's kind of what they're there for. A lot of other bigger companies are outsourcing to these smaller companies so that they don't have to hire people. So this strata of companies hire people. So here's the point. Everywhere that capitalism thrives, poverty is diminished. This is as true. This goes back, pretty much about 300 years now. We have seen, as capitalism rises worldwide, we have seen a reduction in violence. We have seen greater access to healthcare, greater access to education, improvement of the quality of lives for women and children. And everywhere we see capitalism thrive, we see poverty reduce, longer lifespans, everything you'd ever want to see. So Birthing of Giants' idea is we want to promote entrepreneurial capitalism because we want to see a reduction in poverty. And it's global. And so we're very proud to be a tiny, tiny, tiny part of that. But we love that the hundreds of people who we work with are really great entrepreneurial capitalists. They hire, they send their work to other countries. We know that they're charitable and philanthropic in their own communities. They pay taxes, which goes to the schools and the roads. And we know that, poverty is a devastating way of life. And it's not just the word poverty. It's that your lifespan is reduced. It's that you don't have access to good nutrition. It's that those kinds of stressful environments create violence of one person against another. So anything we can do to reduce poverty, that's what we're about.
That's beautifully said. It's basically increasing productivity and supporting those that are very productive, making them more productive. Yes. So I think it's wonderful. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So if someone is listening to us right now and they think they qualify, they want to hear more, how can they contact you?
Just really simple, birthingofgiants.com. And you can learn about Birthing of Giants Fellowship Program. You can learn about Moonshots and Money. Birthing of Giants Fellowship Program is at MIT. Moonshots and Moneymakers is at Oxford. So these are wonderful institutions to be associated with, beautiful places to do some thinking. Nothing wrong with doing some serious thinking in the places where, so the world's greatest innovations took place, So, or if you're a Harry Potter fan, you come to Oxford.
I know, I love Oxford. I've been there several times, and when you said Oxford, I'm like, oh yeah, it's great.
Such a beautiful place. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great place to think. So birthingofgiants.com. And, we'd love to hear from great business owners, great entrepreneurs with great ideas.
Awesome. Well, Luis, that has been thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. It's been a great interview. I learned a lot. Very great ideas and very nicely said in terms of your overall vision. So thank you.
Thank you, Adi. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.